Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And I'm just going to warn you in advance, this video might be a bit of a long one because there's a lot of balls up in the air as far as congressional agricultural policy is concerned. There's a lot of things going on that are not necessarily at the finish line right now, but they're getting there. They're at least working on it. And one of starts in that regard with some action in the Senate on an agricultural appropriations bill that would fund the Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. We've seen similar action in the House, but this week we saw the action in the Senate. And Phil, the bill has advanced out of the subcommittee and out of the full committee. It's now headed to the Senate floor at some point. But some things in the bill, like funding for Cuba, funding for food safety, a lot of things in this bill. How does it compare to what we see in the House legislation? Well,
there's some new elements in here that we can talk about, and we look for this bill to be on the floor probably next month. But a couple of things I'd like to point out is when you mentioned Cuba, there's $1.5 million in this bill to open a Foreign Agriculture Service office in Cuba, presumably Havana. That's something that's very much been a priority for Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack and the administration and their effort to normalize relations with Cuba. That's in there. It's not in the House bill. It certainly will be a subject of negotiations down the road, but very important that it's in the Senate bill. Another thing that our readers are going to be interested in, especially up in the Midwest, is that there is what they're calling a pilot program in the bill to provide supplemental payments to producers, mainly corn and soybean growers, who use the Agriculture Risk Coverage Program and the county-based program, and felt like they got shortchanged in comparison to some of their neighbors in other counties. And there is an alternative calculation set up that the Farm Service Agency can use, and there's a cap of $5 million on total payments. So they're going to try that out. I'm not sure the USDA is still says they're looking into this to see how it will work. Didn't get a strong endorsement of it, but that's something that we're going to have to watch down the road as well.
And a lot of funding in there as well for research. I know when Subcommittee Chairman Jerry Moran of Kansas was kind of doing his opening statement at both the subcommittee and the full committee hearings, that was always one of the bell cows that he pushed on was the increased funding for agricultural research, as well as the Food Safety Modernization Act received some funding as well. And there's a lot of folks, particularly NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, have really been pushing for that FSMA funding because implementation is looming, and they're looking for some help from the federal government.
They're the ones going to be doing a lot of the work, the inspections and so forth.
Yeah. And that bill really sailed through the committee. I don't know. I don't think there were any votes against it, either in full or subcommittee.
No.
Yeah.
No,
so
no.
it's
Particularly in the Senate, you see very much a bipartisan approach to these spending bills. That means certain things that are priorities for some in agriculture don't get on there. One of them I can mention real quick. There's a lot of concern among organic egg producers about a new rule or new regulations that USDA has proposed that would require them to let their hens out to roam around out on the grass outside of barns. Mm-hmm. And some of those major producers saying it's just absolutely unworkable. They pushed very hard for language that would block that rule. They didn't get it. There is some report language telling USDA to consider the comments, sort of a holding place that we may hear more about that as this bill moves forward, because there is concern in Congress on both sides of the aisle about mm-hmm. that.
All right, let's shift gears here a little bit from one bill that is sailing through the process to one bill that is not sailing at all. And that, of course, being the biotech labeling provisions that are currently stuck in the Senate in the negotiating process. Phil, you had a chance to catch up with Senate Ag Chairman Pat Roberts and Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow. What have they told you about the prospect for biotech labeling, and is there a chance this gets done before Memorial Day?
Well, I have to tell you that the chairman, Pat Roberts, is about as optimistic as I've seen him in a while. He's had some direct discussions with Senator Stabenow about that, and this week. He said he's very hopeful they will get something put together. There's still some 2 or 3 at least sticking points, one of them being how Clearly, you exempt animal products from any kind of labeling or disclosure requirement that's going to be in this bill. And there's some other issues in terms of what you require of small businesses and how you define small business. Senator Stabenow wouldn't go into details at all. But she didn't think that they could get anything done before the Memorial Day recess. So that would effectively push any kind of final deal into June. And we have that July 1st effective date for the Vermont labeling law. That's the real deadline, the real wall that Congress is facing.
Yeah, next week is the last week in session before they go on Memorial Day recess. So if they're going to get it done in the month of May, they pretty well have got to get going, because there's really only 7 days, calendar days, that they're going to be in town, and probably even less than that as congressional schedules can sometimes work out. So time is definitely ticking on the month of May, and as you mentioned, it's more likely going to be, if something happens, it's probably
well, they're out of town for a week after that, the week of Memorial Day. So you're back, well into June then.
Yeah, clock is ticking, and as Phil mentioned, that July 1st deadline for the Vermont labeling bill is definitely in the back of everyone's mind as these discussions are going on. But want to shift from the legislative to the executive branch here for a little bit of discussion about something the White House and the Food and Drug Administration rolled out actually this morning. They announced some changes to the nutrition facts label that are going to change up a little bit of how the panel looks, and as well as how the information is comprised. They've added sugars to the menu, or to the label. For instance, the calorie font is going to be much larger, so you'll have a little bit of a better idea what you're eating. Also, some changes to the serving size. Phil, what do you think? What should we be looking at, and what do you think is the big highlight points that we should be looking at when we see this news of the new nutrition facts label?
Well, it's clearly a part of the First Lady Michelle Obama. It's part of a very, very important part of her effort. It's really been her signature cause of her tenure to combat obesity, and especially childhood obesity, and for example, reduce the consumption of sugars. Hence the added line that's going to be on the nutrition facts panel for added sugars. So it'll be separated out. The number is going to stick out there. Be easier for consumers to see. There's also going to be some changes to serving sizes, so that the idea is that they better reflect the larger servings that we now consume typically. And so the larger serving size, you're going to have larger calorie counts, larger counts of added sugars and so forth. It's all a part of to try to educate consumers and make it easier for them to tell exactly how many calories, how much sugar, how much fat, and so forth that they're consuming.
Yeah, and just keeping kind of in that nutrition ballpark, in the House this week, the House Education and Workforce Committee marked up a child nutrition bill that fell kind of along partisan lines due to some working in some things that were done with that bill. And want to talk a little bit about the bill itself, but we'll get to some other points that I think Phil was mentioning before we press record on this on a Friday morning that I think might have some interesting long-term implications. But speaking on the bill itself, it's kind of widely thought that the bill in the House iteration wouldn't have much of a chance in the Senate, and the Senate has already acted on child nutrition. So what do you see as the path going forward for a child nutrition discussion here in Washington?
Well, it's a little hard to see.
Yeah.
This bill is setting up to be a statement of priorities as much as anything else right now. Just to back up, the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act, which was passed by one of the last acts of a Democratic Congress back in 2010. It's the law that authorized USDA to increase standards for school lunch, school breakfast, to restrict snacks, the type of snacks that could be sold on school grounds. Again, another key part of the First Lady's legacy as well. The House bill doesn't really change any of those standards, but it would require USDA to review them every 3 years. In fact, they have to do an immediate review even after this bill became law, which it won't in its current iteration. And there were some restrictions put on. USDA would have to see that, make sure that these rules don't raise costs, push kids off of school lunch, or encourage kids to leave school lunch. So, but it doesn't directly change the standards themselves. I think there are a couple of other issues that are really inflamed Democrats more than anything else. One is there's something called the community eligibility provision that was put into the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. And what that does is it takes, when you have schools where you have a large number of kids already on reduced and reduced price and free meals, it says all of the kids can qualify. What the bill does is it tightened up that, it left that provision in place, tightened it up, which saved some money, which they then put into school breakfast and summer feeding programs. That's one of the things that Democrats are very upset about. The other one, and this was added at the very last minute, it would experiment with taking 3 states, allowing 3 states to basically run the program themselves, set their own standards, take the money as block grants that the federal government is now spending on school meals, and let these states run the program themselves as a pilot program, being pitched as a pilot program.
And the concept of block granting has really kind of dipped its toe in the water as far as agricultural policy is concerned, particularly surrounding the Farm Bill. And there's been some discussions, I don't know how serious they could really be classified, but there's been some discussions that are saying, hey, you know, maybe in the next Farm Bill, some folks might try and look at block granting some of this information, particularly when it comes to SNAP, or food stamps as it's also known. I mean, do you think this could serve as some sort of precedent-setting role that block granting got through committee, and some folks might make similar attempts when a Farm Bill is being discussed here in a couple of years?
I think you'll probably see it again. In fact, Republicans have been pushing the idea of block granting food stamps to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, for many years, probably to some extent for a couple of decades. I think the bigger lesson here, I don't think this block granting idea is not going to go anywhere. It has no chance in the Senate. It has no chance to be signed into law. I think what's significant here, though, is the reason that this is in the bill. It's there because a number of conservatives in the House, pushed by groups like the Heritage Foundation, are pushing hard for this concept of getting away from the government dictating things like nutrition standards. I think there's a good chance that the House Agriculture Committee is going to have to deal with the same pressure when they come to writing the next Farm Bill in 2018. It's an increasingly fractured caucus in the House, a Republican caucus in the House, and this pressure from the right is going to only increase probably going into the next Congress.
So that'll be something we'll have to keep an eye on for kind of an extended period of time, because that's not something, they're not going to be discussing the Farm Bill next week by any means, but that's something that might come up when those discussions commence here in a year or two. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it was going to be a long one. It has been, but there's a lot of things going on, and we wanted to make sure that we kept you apprised of everything that was going on here in Washington, agriculturally speaking. So I think that's going to do it for this week. Unless there's more news that broke while we were recording this, who knows, it's possible. But for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.